Donc on va commencer. Je pense que tout le monde est là. Tout le monde devrait pouvoir m'entendre. Tout le monde devrait pouvoir voir aussi donc j'ai partagé mon écran avec cette magnifique page introductive que nous a fait Sébastien. Donc si quelqu'un ne voilà, si quelqu'un m'entend pas, dites-le moi, ça va être dit, c'est toujours un peu étrange. Donc bonjour à tous. On entend très bien, on voit bien les slides. Merci Sergio. Bonjour à tous pour cette première session des séminaires mensuels du GDRIA. Donc je vais faire une petite séquence introductive avant de passer la main à Philippe. Donc juste pour rappeler donc merci à tous d'être là déjà. Et donc ces séminaires, ils ont pour but de mettre en avant des chercheurs de la communauté. Et alors l'idée, c'est que ce soit des chercheurs qui soient principalement proposés par les groupes de travail du GDR, voire le comité des grands sages du GDR aussi, et donc que des personnalités scientifiques nous fassent un exposé qui soit à la fois technique mais accessible à la plus grande partie de la communauté, au moins pour la plus grande part de l'exposé, et éventuellement qui nous fassent part de leurs avis sur les enjeux clés futurs que peuvent poser les problèmes dont ils vont parler. Donc là, on a eu différents GT, donc on remercie déjà donc Nicolas, Sébastien et moi-même, donc l'autre Sébastien. On remercie beaucoup les GT de leur réactivité et des propositions qu'ils ont pu nous faire et des propositions qu'ils pourront nous faire. Donc le groupe de travail BIOS a été très 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 réactif, je dois dire, hein, avec des propositions qui sont arrivées très très vite. Donc le premier séminaire qu'on va avoir aujourd'hui, c'est Loïc Paulevé qui va nous faire un exposé que Philippe va nous introduire dans un instant. Et le prochain séminaire, donc, il aura lieu le 28 avril et ce sera Joao, alors là ma prononciation doit être aussi terrible, Marques Silva, qui nous parlera lui plutôt d'explicabilité et de méthodes formelles de raisonnement pour l'explicabilité. Donc je pense que c'est tout ce qu'il y a à dire sur ces séminaires. Donc si à la fois, bon, si vous avez fait partie d'un GT ou pas forcément, mais si vous voulez faire remonter des noms, n'hésitez pas. Voilà, donc on essaie de coordonner et co-organiser ça avec Nicolas et l'ensemble des GT. Et Nicolas, je ne sais pas si tu as des choses à rajouter sur ce que je viens de dire.
Non, rien de plus, rien de plus. Parfait.
Vous pouvez juste redire peut-être qu'en plus de l'exposé, il y avait un petit cahier des charges, de déboucher un peu sur des
Ah oui,
perspectives.
oui, non, non, c'est ce que j'ai dit. Oui, on demande aux gens qui vont faire les exposés d'éventuellement nous faire un point sur les prospectives importantes des domaines qu'ils vont couvrir. Donc Loïc nous dira s'il a pu, dans le temps imparti, qui était relativement court, se plier à cet exercice, qui reste facultatif quand même, hein, qui n'est pas... voilà, les séminaristes ont quand même la liberté de nous exposer ce qu'ils veulent. Voilà, on a un petit cahier des charges, mais qui sont des contraintes très, très, très souples, donc pas vraiment des contraintes. Je pense que si Nicolas, du coup, voilà, Philippe, c'est le bon moment pour te passer la main. Donc, je vais te laisser animer scientifiquement cette première session des séminaires mensuels qu'on espère durer longtemps et nombreux.
Bah, merci. Donc bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Ah oui, attends. On enregistrera, mais pas la séance des questions-réponses ne sera pas enregistrée. Donc, comme on a dit juste avant, vous pourrez poser toutes les questions que vous voulez, stupides ou intelligentes, et Loïc fera des réponses intelligentes.
Par définition. Donc je suis très heureux là d'accueillir Loïc. Donc Loïc est chargé de recherche CNRS, HDR. Il a commencé, son premier poste a été au LRI dans l'équipe Bioinfo. Donc c'est là que je l'ai connu. On travaille même un petit peu ensemble. Et depuis quoi, 2 ans et demi à peu près, il est au Labri, donc à Bordeaux. Donc ses travaux sont sur les méthodes formelles pour la biologie des systèmes, hein. Et en particulier, au point de vue formalisme, il s'intéresse particulièrement au réseau booléen dynamique, où il a eu une contribution que vous devez connaître assez remarquable avec des collègues du ex-LSV l'an dernier dans Nature, donc sur une nouvelle sémantique des réseaux booléens dynamiques qui subsument les sémantiques habituelles synchrones ou les diverses asynchrones, et qui en plus a le bon goût d'être d'une complexité algorithmique moindre. Et il s'intéresse aussi à la reproductibilité autour de Colomoto. Voilà, donc je lui passe la parole. Il va nous parler aujourd'hui d'apprentissage symbolique, ça changera du deep learning, d'apprentissage symbolique d'ensemble, de plusieurs réseaux booléens prédictifs pour le destin cellulaire. Voilà. Juste, Loïc, est-ce que les questions sont en principe réservées à la fin, hein, surtout tout ce qui est débat, questions de fond. Est-ce que tu autorises, s'il y a quelqu'un qui bloque un peu sur un truc, de t'interrompre pour une question factuelle sur un transparent?
Oui, bien sûr, il n'y a pas de problème.
Voilà. Donc, dans ce cas-là, vous levez la main ou vous activez votre micro. Sinon, par défaut, vous fermez tous vos micros. Et moi, j'enlève ma frimouille. Allez, à toi, Loïc.
Ok. Bon, merci beaucoup. Je sais, toute l'intro là est en français. Je crois qu'on continue comme ça. Je ne sais pas s'il y a une habitude.
Oui, il faudrait peut-être. Est-ce que dans le chat, si quelqu'un ne comprend pas le français, souhaite que ça soit en anglais, qui se manifeste dans le chat? Je vois rien.
Il faut peut-être dire ça en anglais.
Aïe, aïe, aïe. Très juste, je suis très bon là. So, if somebody doesn't understand French and wants the talk is in English, please, can you signal this in the Q&A or in the chat? Is everybody okay with French? Ça semble.
Ok. Bon, je vais faire ça en français alors, du coup.
On a dans le chat Adjé qui dit qu'il ne comprend pas le français.
Ouais.
Okay, so no problem. So I will anyway, I plan to do it in English, but so that's no problem at all. Okay, so thank you very much, Philippe, for the introduction. Yeah, so I will present from a very high level one of a big challenge we are tackling now with a lot of colleagues that evolve that are inspired by biology, by problems in biology, and for which we try to apply methods from computer science, and more precisely from formal methods and logic, and maybe at some point also machine learning. So my objective is really to present you the main problem, the overall challenge, a little bit of techniques, and a bit of discussion on the limitation we have so far with this kind of symbolic approaches for tackling this problem. So one of the main motivations from biology is to understand a general process of cell, which is called the cellular differentiation, or which is also related to cell fate decision. So, you know, we all started as one cell, and this cell recursively divided. And along the division, a certain cell choose progressively a certain type of function to become like a skin, neurons, fat, bone, whatever. And so this follows what we a process where from sorry, do you see my pointer? No. My mouse pointer, do you see it? No? Okay.
No.
So it depends on the okay. So sorry. Okay. So on the top left, you see that from stem cells, it can then progressively become a multipotent progenitors. We call that progressively take a function until going what we call a differentiated cell, which has a specific function in the body. So this differentiation process, a part of it is natural, and another part of it is often then triggered by signal. It could be to adapt to the environment or to a specific signal sent to the cell that tells it to change of function or to move on in the differentiation process. So this is a very general question in biology. A lot of it, for instance, is related to the differentiation of cell in the blood, because it's also linked to the immune systems. So that's the differentiation process. We want to try to understand it, but we also ultimately want to control it. And so there's been some experiments already almost 10 years ago that showed that we can take fully differentiated cells and by injecting a particular cocktail of kind of proteins in the cell, we can trigger a change of type of the cell. So one of the well-known experiments done by Yamanaka was to take some cells under the skin, and when it injects a particular cocktail of four specific proteins, the cells somehow go back in the differentiation process and go back to a pluripotent state. So this is this IPS cells for induced pluripotent stem cells. And then for this kind of cell, we know how to differentiate them in different kind of cells. So for instance, when you inject another type of cocktail, or you put something in the environment, and it will become a neuron, a different type of cell. So this is something which is possible. We know it is possible. It has been done on human cell. And we can also do it more directly without going to this stem state by using another cocktail of particular proteins. We inject them in the cell, and they go directly into neurons, for instance. So of course the question is, what kind of proteins should we put in the cell so that it goes to the right type? And so for that, we expect that models can help finding these cocktails. So when we want to model, so I'm not a biologist at all, so I really come from computer science. And so when you come to biology, it's quite surprising the complexity of the process you may want to model. Because there's a lot of features related to cells. You have the shape of the cell, which is important. What composes the cell, so the amount of different kind of proteins within the cell. The shape of the proteins, the shape of a lot of things is important. You have the fluxes of ions through the membrane. You have the gene expression, so the amount of how quickly it gets translated into proteins through this RNA production. You have the metabolism. You have a lot of things to model, and each of them is very complex. So at some point you need to make a choice and say, okay, so for this process we will focus on modeling this particular type of this particular feature in biology. And so for cellular differentiation, for now, a lot of models focus on modeling what we call the gene expression, because it is believed to be one of the main regulation of cellular differentiation. So this is what I will focus on in this talk, these models of gene regulation. So what is gene regulation? So it's pity I don't have a pointer. You have these genes. So you have the DNA, and part of the DNA we call them genes, and depending on different condition, a gene can be translated into a protein. It's a multi-step process where it first goes to this RNA. So you make somehow a copy of the gene, and it gives you an RNA, and then this RNA is translated into a protein. And you have some proteins, particular kind of proteins that have an effect on the production of RNA from other genes. So this is the case of this orange protein here that has an influence on the speed of the production of the gene blue. So it could be positively or negatively, but it can activate or repress the expression of the gene blue. So these particular proteins, we call them transcription factors. And you see that it starts to shape a big network of influence between the genes. So some genes, when expressed, will activate other genes and also repress other genes in return. So you have a big influence network appearing into this for this genetic expression. So just to give you some numbers, so in human cells, so depend on how you count, you have between 20,000 to 30,000 genes. And among these genes, so these genes translate into proteins. We somehow assume a one-to-one, one gene is one kind of protein. And you have around roughly between a bit less than 2,000 transcription factors. So these kind of proteins that have an effect on the expression of other genes. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the system we might want to model. But of course, when you focus, for instance, on the differentiation of cells in the blood, or for making a particular kind of cell, not all the transcription factors are important, play a role with respect to a more narrow number of transcription factors to be useful. On top of that, you have what we call signalization. So you have on the membrane, you have some receptors that act like as sensors somehow. And when a receptor get activated, it will trigger a cascade of reaction involving proteins that ultimately will again either activate a particular gene or repress its expression. So this is a very highly combinatoric process of these proteins, because you have a lot of complexes, a lot of proteins changing of shape. But we also have some models related to that if we want to be interested in modeling gene expression. Okay, so what is known? So you have a lot of databases relating known influences between genes, transcription factors, proteins. That essentially gathers reported influences in many experiments, or then also due to analysis of sequences and so on. So in our case, we have some databases of evidences of interaction between genes and proteins, transcription factors. So it agglomerates data from a lot of different cellular conditions, sometimes also from different species and so on. So in this example of database here, which is specifically between transcription factors and genes, you see that in these databases it's quite well furnished. So we have this 1,400 transcription factors and 1 million interactions with our reference. When you're interested in a particular system, so you will have maybe new data generated by experiments. It is quite likely that not all the inferences are already known in the database. So this can be completed by methods related to causal inference. So to try to infer which genes have an influence or other genes in the system just by observing the changes of its activity. So there's a lot of work on this causal inference from observation data. And in our case, we take it as input for our method. So what we are looking at is this influences between the genes and the proteins in terms of activation and inhibition. So unfortunately, we have not yet any general rule that govern how a network should be shaped. So there is no E equal MC2, no free energy to guide how a network should be built. So except this known influences, we have no strong constraint to fulfill to build the network. So that's the influences. So somehow the knowledge you can have access to, which is a fastly growing knowledge. Then you need to make observation of this system. So you have a lot of different type of data. So I just illustrated with this trendy type of data, which is heavily used now. So this is like the data you will use to build your model. So I put a drawing of a mouse, not a picture, just to show you how concrete it can be. So here it shows that we can how to extract some cells, most of the time related to kind of stem cells that we found in the bone marrow, so la moelle épinière, that are related to the generation of different type of blood cells. So you take some cell in the mouse, and then you have big machines that can split the cells and count the number of RNA you have in each cell for each type of genes, for instance. So this is how you measure the activity of a gene. You count the number of RNA it produced. So this is what we call this RNA sequencing. We can do that at the single cell level. So cell per cell, we count the different type of RNA it currently has. And then using machine learning techniques, classification techniques, we can organize these cells into this differentiation tree, where you see on the left the HAC, so it's the beginning of the differentiation process, and the cells progressively, different type of cell goes into these differentiation branches. So each dot is a cell, and depending on the expression of the different genes, we can classify them as more belonging to HSC or more to already differentiated myeloid, lymphoid, and so on. So this is a kind of system that we want to model, to have a model for how you go from HSC to myeloid. So you want to model the evolution of the gene expression and try to predict if it will how it will go to myeloid, lymphoid, or different type of cells. So in this kind of experiments, here you have a bit more than 1,500 dots, so cells, and it relates to the expression of roughly 4,000 genes. So you have observation of 4,000 genes in 1,600 cells along the differentiation process. Then you can, as we want to understand what genes are important, what genes drive these differentiation processes, you also have experiments that use genetic modification to block the expression of certain genes, for instance, and see how it affects the differentiation process. So then you need to grow a different type of mouse, need to do other experiments, so it takes several days, for instance, to do. And then you do the same experiments, and you see that your cells, when you block certain genes, just go into one differentiation branch, for instance. So it means that these genes are very important to control the process. Okay, so we want to do a model of that. So this is the observation we have on our system. It's like when you want to model have a model of Go or chess, where you observe players making a game. Here we observe genes changing of value. And we want to build a model of that. So there's a lot of modeling approaches for these genes. Of course, you can model the genes, the expression of genes using differential equations, where you will have a very precise model of the activity of genes over time. But this requires a lot of parameters. We also have stochastic models, where here you have a more precise model in terms of numbers. So you really look at the stochasticity effects. But you also have roughly the same type of parameters than differential equations. And then you have much more coarse-grained models that we call qualitative model. Here we do not model the concentration, the copy number of proteins. We just model the fact that a gene is active enough to have a role in the system or not active enough. And this is models that are called Boolean networks that were introduced for biology roughly 50 years ago. And that's more and more used to model the system, because they require little parameters, and so you can quickly start making models of dynamical system with that. So I'll just make a quick introduction to Boolean network, and then I will go back to this inference problem we have. So a Boolean network is a very simple specification. So it's a function that maps Boolean vectors of a fixed dimension to other Boolean vectors of the same dimension. So essentially, it models each dimension models the state of a set of automata. So here n automata. So when you give a vector of n Boolean, so we call it a configuration, it gives you the state of the n automata. And then for each automata, using this function f, you specify how the state of each automaton will evolve according to the state of all the automata in the system. So for instance, in my example, you have f1 of x equal not x2. So it means that the automaton 1 will go to value 1 if the automaton 2 is 0, is off. So this is an example of Boolean network. We can summarize the inferences between the variable in this inference graph. Here, the idea is that even if each local function can, in theory, depend on all the all the automata of the system, in practice, each automaton depends on a few of the automata in the system. And here we represent these dependencies in this inference. And we can even put a sign. So you have a negative sign from 2 to 1 because 2 appears with a negation in the function f1. So 2, if you increase 2, in some cases it will decrease 1, and if you increase 2, in some cases it will increase 3. So you have a negative influence from 2 to 1 and a positive influence from 2 to 3. So you see the link here, this inference graph with what I showed you, the influences between the genes that I showed earlier. So then we want to have a dynamical system from that. So we need to specify a semantics. We call that updating mode in the Boolean network settings. So it tells you that how you compute the next, how you predict the next configuration from an initial one. So if you start from the configuration where all the blocks are white, here, so everyone is 0, you see that you have different ways of computing the next configuration. So if you apply f on this 0, 0, 0 vector, you see that as x2 is 0, f1 of 0, 0 is 1. F2 of 0, 0 is 1 as well, and F3 of 0, 0, 0 is 0, because x2 is 0. So 1 and 2 can go to 1, and 3 will stay 0. So depending if you update all of them simultaneously, you will go to the state 1, 1, 0 on the left. Or then you may have a choice to make. Either you just update automata, so the first automata 1, and then you go to the state 1, 0, 0 in the bottom, or to the state 0, 1, 0 on the top. And then you repeat this process, and you can, like that, compute the evolution of the state of each automata in the system over time. And you see here the shape that on this small example, we can, you see that depending on if you update the first or the second automaton, you will end up in two different configuration, either 0, 1, 1 or 1, 0, 0, from which you cannot evolve anymore. And so you see that there is a choice, and depending on the choice you made, you end up in two different configuration. So this is some kind of, you can see some kind of differentiation process here. So what are the kind of dynamical properties we look for? So a very important one is what we call attractors. So you have this dynamical system, you make it evolve over time, and after an infinite number of time, it will end up in an attractor. So it corresponds to this stable state in the cell, so where the cell will stabilize. So once you're in an attractor, you cannot escape from it. So in this small example, you have two attractors, which are a particular type. There are two fixed points because it's just a single configuration in the both cases. Once you're in 0, 1, 1, you cannot evolve anymore. But you can also imagine attractors where you have oscillation, where you still block within a small set of configuration from which you cannot escape. And then you have trajectories. So if you start from a certain configuration, you want to know if there is a path, a trajectory from this configuration to a specific attractor. So if you can reach one or another stable state. And for differentiation, an important feature is that once you have some configuration from which you cannot reach another attractor, so you have no trajectory at all between starting from a configuration going to another. So once you have these models, you can start doing this kind of prediction for the control. So let's say you are in the system is in the attractor red. You want to go in the attractor green. So you will have to perturbate your system to do that, because by default you will stay in red forever. And so in this small example, what you can remark is that if you force the second automaton to go to the value 1, you will go back to this state 1, 1, 0. And as long as you block the second automaton to stay 1, you will force the system to go to the other differentiation branch, and finally reach this other attractor, the green attractor. Once you're in the green attractor here, in this case, you can even release your perturbation. You can restore the default behavior of the system, and you will stay in green. But you can also have some cases where you need to maintain this perturbation forever if you want to keep the system where you want it to. So this is some kind of control, classical control of dynamical systems, for which we have different settings for the kind of perturbation we are allowed to do and when we are allowed to do them. That may be constrained by biological constraints or experimental constraints. And we have a lot of techniques to compute this reprogramming. So by computing these graphs here from the Boolean network, we compute this transition graph, and we reason on the possible perturbation to make the control. We also have techniques using logic programming, a lot of different approaches. So once you have these models of Boolean networks, where you can model the dynamic of genes, for instance, you see that you can start to do a lot of interesting things for the practical application. And you can explain why blocking 2 to 1 will make your system go to the desired state. So the question is, how do we come up with this Boolean network? So essentially, as I tell you in the motivation, we have from databases background knowledge. We have known influences between genes, between proteins, which can be assigned. So we know that this gene has a negative influence on another gene, so a positive one. And then we have dynamical property from the observation we made of the system. So for instance, from the experiment I did in the mouse, I know that starting from some state of genes, I can go to different differentiation branches, for instance. And so from this from this knowledge and observation, I want to find a model, a logical model that can reproduce what I observed. So if we take the question more globally, so we have this observation that are translated into dynamical properties. We have this network architecture that comes from databases, but also maybe completed with statistical analysis to make causal inference, for instance. And from that, we want to infer possible Boolean networks, to build Boolean networks that satisfy this. And then from these Boolean networks, we want to make prediction to control the system. So to do that, we will sample some possible models and compute the prediction using our control algorithms, and then propose them for experimentations. So the framework I show you here, we did it in logic programming. So we employ logic programming to express this synthesis problem. So more specifically, we use answer set programming, and we can go to rather realistic scale now. So we can infer models in the scale of number of transcription factors with several thousand of automata. And so I will just focus a bit on how we do that, how we do this synthesis, the synthesis part. So how we go from this dynamical network architecture to the Boolean network, to the ensemble of Boolean networks we use to make our prediction. Another important aspect of the pipeline, of course, is how you go from observation to dynamical properties. So it requires again some statistical analysis you will do on the data to derive a binary value for some genes. So to say that a gene is in this particular differentiation stage, this gene is more active or inactive. Often we don't know, we cannot assign a value. The statistical analysis is not conclusive, so we let it open to know if it's 0 or 1. And then we translate that into this property related to the existence of trajectories, absence of trajectory, and stability. So when you are in this myeloid, erythroid, or lymphoid state, we say that they belong to attractors, and otherwise you have trajectories between following this differentiation tree you see on the top right. So the important thing to see is that it is heavily related to model checking, because we want to find a model F such that F verifies some dynamical properties. So the properties relate to existence or absence of trajectory and attractors. And here we are interested in finding the specification, which is, let's say, small, compared to the transition graph, which can be of exponential size. But so if we want to do that, something which is the main bottleneck may be the complexity for the verification of this dynamical property. So what is the complexity of verifying the existence of trajectory and attractors if I give you the specification F? So it will depend on the updating mode you choose for the Boolean networks. So usually with the classical asynchronous, synchronous updates, it is a very difficult problem. It's a p-space complete problems. So it means in practice, if you want to do it exactly, you're stuck around 100 automata. But here we rely on this most permissive updating mode that we introduced recently, that have double advantage of being a formal abstraction of a quantitative system that other updating modes are not. So it allows you to have a formal reasoning from the model you will synthesize, the Boolean model, and the quantitative system you observe. So you observe quantities, you infer a Boolean model, so it is important to be able to make a formal link between the two. And especially with these most permissive Boolean networks, you have the guarantee that if you fix a model and you analyze it with the Boolean logic, you cannot miss any behavior you can achieve with the same logic of a quantitative model. So it's a good abstraction of the quantitative system. It's a good over-approximation of the trajectory of the quantitative system, which is something you do not have with other updating modes. And in our case, what is also important with this most permissive approach is that it has a low complexity for verifying the properties. So verifying the existence of trajectories, it becomes a polynomial time problem, and attractors is in CoNP. So it means that in our case, when we want to infer these models, thanks to this low complexity, we can hope to do that at large scale. So we employ logic programming to do that, and more specifically answer-set programming. So it's declarative. So it means that you do not tell how you design a model. You just declare the property you wanted to verify, and then you have a generic solver that will do it for you to find the good F that match with your constraints. So it's related to these SAT approaches. So I will not enter into the detail of answer-set programming, but it has a few specificities that make it very handy to model quite complex constraints that we have here to model reachability, to model attractors. And in terms of expressivity, it can go beyond that. So we have some properties that need to be that belongs to a higher complexity class than a pure SAT. So we need to solve sometime problem with different level of quantifiers. And with answer-set programming, you can add one level of quantifier in your formula to satisfy. So the idea then is to express this synthesis problem as a satiety problem. So you will express the fact that F, your Boolean network F, is at the same time compatible with known influences and compatible with desired properties that you observe in your system. You will write that in a big formula. Here is the shape of an ISP answer set programming model, and such that each solution of this equation, big equation, is a distinct Boolean network that fulfills the constraint you get. Then you may be interested, instead of enumerating the Boolean network, you can enumerate the inference graphs, or you can enumerate just the different function you can put on automata I, for instance. So in our case, so the complexity of the encoding, so one important aspect is if you want to enumerate solution, is that you want to make sure that you will not enumerate twice the same Boolean network. Because you have a lot of different ways to express exactly the same Boolean network. So we impose a canonical representation of them. I will have not time to describe it in detail, but we have a way to enforce that each solution will give you a different Boolean network thanks to this canonical representation. Of course, it has an impact on the complexity of the encoding. So if you do not care about this canonicity, you just want to find one solution, for instance, you don't want to enumerate them. Then the encoding is the number of rules you need to declare, the size of the program somehow. Is linear with the number of influences you may have, and with the maximum number of clauses you want to have in your DNF representation of the function. So this number of clauses you may have in the DNF is of course exponential in the number of variables you can consider. If you want canonicity, it's no longer linear, it becomes quadratic, which in practice, when you have several thousand of variables, makes a huge difference. And for the maximum number of clauses, what we have to do when we have a lot of variables, of input variables, we need to force a bound on it. And so we end up with an under approximation of the solution, because we just consider, for instance, all Boolean function you can represent with 10 clauses, for instance. So in practice, how it goes, so I'll show you on two different type of data. So we start with, so we have this observation I told you. We start from full extraction of databases, either between only transcription factors or taking into account more nodes, more proteins. And so the idea, because you have a lot of variables, first stage is first to identify nodes, transcription factors, proteins that have no impact on the process. So how we do that? We want to find Boolean networks that are compatible with the database, the dynamical properties, and we want to maximize the number of nodes that can be assigned to a constant. And so if by assigning a node to a constant, you can reproduce, explain the dynamics you've seen, it means that the node has no impact on the process, and you can remove it from the network. So using this filtering stage, we go from networks with several thousand of nodes to a couple of hundred of nodes. And then from this reduced network, then you can apply more advanced dynamical properties, and you can start enumerating solutions. So So in summary, we go here from knowledge and observation of a system to formal dynamical models from which we can make a new prediction. The observations are quite are very you just observe a partial set of genes, and importantly, you see that in the experiments you just have the observation in a few different experimental conditions. So often it's in the default system. We can have observation with a couple of mutations, but you have observation in a few different conditions. So this makes the problem challenging. You don't have a lot of data to constrain your model. So we use Boolean network because it reduces a lot the number of parameters you need to learn. And you have formal relation with quantitative models, and you can go to quite large scale for the reasoning. So far, most models of Boolean networks are designed manually, and involve a lot of arbitrary choices. And so the idea of this problem is to lift the modeling process to give just the constraint you want to have on your model, and try to remove a few several arbitrary choices you'll have to make if you want to design it by hand. And so to do that, we have two key ingredients. Is that we need to translate this observation into discrete dynamical properties, and then we employ this logic programming that allows you to efficiently derive models that will fulfill your dynamical property and enumerate them, and you can do it at a very large scale. So with this logical approach, we have what is nice is that we have a complete access. In theory, we have a complete access to the space of solution if the network is not too big. In practice, of course, we have a partial view of this space of solution. And you can also make queries, like you can ask, do you still have solution if I remove this influence, or do you have models that use this or that feature? So this is something you can efficiently query in your model, and it is structurable to this somehow genome scale data. So now going on the limitations, the issue we have now is that we see that we have a lot of solutions. We have, given the data we have actually billions of models that are all equivalent if you just consider the input constraints. And so with this logical approach, we have no access to this predictive power that you can somehow assess in machine learning approaches. And so we don't know if we should give sample more small or more large models. We have no idea what will be the model that if I put it in a new condition that I have not observed, will give me an accurate prediction with a high chance. So this is something we have no access with these logical approaches. So what we do is we don't take one solution in random. We take a lot of them. We build an ensemble of models. And so how can we reason on this ensemble of models efficiently? Can we count the number of solutions, thinking to have an idea of if I add a new constraint, a new observation, does it really add information to build my model? And so the main question is how we drive this model sampling towards the best predictive models. And so the idea then is to try to couple this approach with this machine learning techniques. So we have a few training and test data sets. So, but the idea then is to use this logic programming approach to sample models that fit with the training data. Then you can evaluate them on the test data. And the first approach we are trying to look at is to see if you have some features that make a model more predictive than others. So for instance, we are looking if the size of the model is important or not. And then so it means you will apply the machine learning on the results of the logical approach. And here you can generate a lot of data to learn to train your model, because we can sample thousands, several hundred of thousands of models and give them a score, and from that apply different method to make the feature selection. So this is a project that we start and to try to bring this predictive power assessment for this synthesis approach. So a lot of things that I told you involve a PhD student, so Stéphanie Chevalier, in this symbolic learning of models, and collaborators at Institut Curie on the modeling of biological system and the data expertise on the data we have is input, and colleagues in Luxembourg on this who generate also new experimental data to validate our prediction and give expertise on the model. So I thank you, and I can take a question now.
So thank you very much, Loïc. So I recall you have two ways to ask question to Loïc. One is to write your question in the chat. Another is to activate your mic.